Boise Basin, Idaho Territory, autumn 1882. Silas Thorne was mending a broken fence when a young Chinese woman appeared on the road. She wore a red silk robe. She carried a battered leather suitcase. Silas had lived alone for 3 years. Smallpox had taken his wife, Sarah, and their little boy. The woman stopped at his gate. "I heard you needed a wife," she said. Her voice was soft, like water moving over smooth stones in a deep creek. Silas froze. The hammer in his hand felt suddenly heavy, an anchor in the dust. His heart gave a painful, rhythmic thud against his ribs. He remembered a moment of weakness at the general store weeks ago. He had made one lonely remark to a merchant over a sack of flour. He never expected it to travel through the basin like a wildfire. "You're a long way from town," he said. His voice was raspy, thick with the rust of 3 years without conversation. "I know," the woman replied. "My name is Mei Lin."
Silas looked down at her suitcase. He saw her trembling hands, though her face remained a mask of iron. "You walked all the way from the lower road?" he asked. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. 2 miles, she said. "The stagecoach driver left me at the crossroads. He told me he would not bring a Chinese woman to a lonely man's ranch after dark." She lowered her eyes for a fleeting second, "So I walked the rest of the way." Silas felt a surge of hot, bitter anger in his gut. The world was a cruel place for a woman forced to walk alone after dark. The Chinese Exclusion Act had been signed that very spring. The country was turning cold and jagged against people like her. In the mining camps, the gold was thinning out. Desperate men were looking for someone to blame for their empty pans. Anti-Chinese hatred hung over the Idaho Territory like thick, suffocating smoke. "The driver is a fool," Silas grunted. He spat into the dry dust at his feet. He reached out and opened the heavy wooden gate. It creaked loudly on its rusted, neglected hinges.
"Come inside, Mei Lin. The sun is gone. The cold will catch your bones if you stay out here." She hesitated for a heartbeat. Then she stepped onto his land. She crossed the invisible line between the world and his sanctuary. "Maybe you should see the house first," Silas said. "It's not much to look at. I'm a man who has forgotten how to live for anyone but himself." "It is enough," she replied. The cabin interior was dim and smelled of old wood and cold ashes. Silas struck a match. The yellow glow of a kerosene lamp chased the shadows into the corners. Mei Lin set her suitcase down. The heavy thud echoed through the hollow floorboards. She saw the photograph on the mantel. It was a small, silver-framed image of Sarah. Mei Lin walked over to it with quiet, respectful elegance. She touched the wood of the frame with a gentle finger. "She was beautiful," Mei Lin said.
"She was the heart of this place," Silas replied. "The heart stopped beating a long time ago." Mei Lin turned back to face him, the lamplight catching the gold threads in her robe. "I cannot be her," she said plainly. "I do not ask you to be," Silas said. He looked down at his calloused, dirt-stained hands. "I just need a partner. Someone to help keep the wolves of the winter back. The hunger and the silence are very loud in this valley." Mei Lin looked at the stack of unwashed plates on the table. "I can cook," she said. "I can work the garden. But I will not be a servant. I will not be a slave." Silas met her gaze, seeing the steel reflected in her eyes. "I don't want a servant. I want a wife, a person to stand beside me against the wind." Mei Lin searched his face for a lie, for a hint of the cruelty she had seen in town. She found only honest, bone-deep weariness.
"It will be hard," she warned. "The people in town will call you names for this." "Let them talk," Silas said. "Talk is as cheap as the dirt under our boots. Winter is expensive. I don't want to die in a house that has forgotten the sound of a voice." Mei Lin took off her red outer robe. She folded it with extreme, deliberate care. Underneath, she wore a simple indigo cotton tunic. She began to roll up her sleeves. "Then show me where the flour is, Silas Thorne. I will make something better than silence for dinner." That night, Silas woke before the first light of dawn. The fire had burned down to a low orange pulse. Mei Lin was sitting by the window, her suitcase open at her feet. Inside was a faded photograph of her parents and a small, vibrant silk ribbon. For a moment,
She looked as though she might vanish before the sun rose. Silas did not ask her to stay. He only walked to the hearth and placed another heavy log on the fire. The road will still be there tomorrow.
Tonight, you are safe. She looked at him and nodded slowly. She closed the suitcase with a soft click. For a while, neither of them spoke. Silas sat near the dying fire. Mei Lin sat on the edge of his bed, her hands folded in her lap. The cabin was small. There was nowhere to hide from another person's sorrow. Finally, Mei Lin looked toward the door. "Will you lock it?" she asked. Silas understood what she meant. He rose without a word. He checked the bolt. Then he placed the heavy wooden bar across the door. When he turned back, Mei Lin's shoulders had loosened. "It has been a long time since I slept behind a locked door," she said. Silas looked at the fire. "It has been a long time since anyone asked me to lock one." That night, the cabin was still poor. It was still cold around the windows.
But it no longer felt empty. The first week was a delicate dance of shadows. They lived in the same small space, but did not touch. Silas slept on the floor by the fire. He gave her his bed because it was the only honorable thing to do. Justice begins at home, he told himself. Mei Lin cleaned the cabin until the old timber began to glow. She found Sarah's old spices, hidden and forgotten in the back of the pantry. The food began to taste of ginger, heat, and mystery. The steam in the kitchen smelled like life returning to a frozen garden. One evening, the wind was howling through the chimney. She sat by the fire, mending his heavy wool socks with precision. "Why did you come here, Mei Lin?" he asked. He was sitting at the table, cleaning his rifle. "My father worked the mines in California," she said. "He died in a tunnel collapse near Grass Valley. After he died, my mother simply stopped eating. A month later, she was gone too." Silas paused his cleaning, the oilcloth still in his hand. He knew that kind of suffocation. He knew the weight of a house that had become too large for one person. "I ran away from San Francisco in the middle of a dark night," she continued. "I heard there was work in the Idaho Basin. I heard the men in the store talking about the lonely widower. They called you a pathetic, broken soul." Silas frowned. "They laugh because they are afraid of the quiet," he said. "I didn't laugh," Mei Lin said. "I thought, there is a man who knows the shape of loss. Perhaps two broken people can still build something whole." Silas reached out across the table. He placed his hand over hers, his rough skin contrasting with her own. "I am a hard man, Mei Lin. I have nothing to give you but this red earth and the sky." She turned her hand over and squeezed his fingers with surprising strength. "The dirt grows food," she said. "The sky gives us rain. That is enough for me. We are both moving forward now." The next morning, Mei Lin found a small box beneath the kitchen table. Inside were packets of seeds, rusted garden tools, and a pair of worn leather gloves. "Sarah's?" she asked softly. Silas nodded. "She loved that garden. After she died, I could not bear to touch it." Mei Lin picked up the gloves. She did not put them on. "Would want that?" "She was part of this land before I was," Mei Lin replied. "I do not want to erase her. I want to help you carry her memory without letting it bury you." The following Sunday, Silas hitched the horses to the wagon. "We're going to town," he said. Mei Lin looked at her red dress, the silk catching the morning light. "I should wear something else," she whispered. "No," Silas said firmly. "Wear that red dress. Let them see you coming from a mile away. You are my wife." As they drove into Idaho City, the chatter on the boardwalk died instantly. Men stopped outside the swinging doors of the saloons. Women pulled their children closer to their skirts. The air grew thick with the weight of judgment. Then the whispers started, buzzing like angry wasps in the heat. "Look at Thorne. He brought a Chinese woman to his ranch." Silas kept his eyes locked on the road ahead. His grip on the leather reins was white-knuckled and steady. He felt Mei Lin trembling beside him. He reached over and took her hand in the middle of the crowded street. He wanted every pair of eyes in that town to see his choice. Silas pulled the wagon up outside the land office. Judge Miller was waiting on the porch, his face set in stone. A crowd had already gathered in the dusty square. "I came to put Maylin's name beside mine on the ranch deed," Silas said. His voice boomed, echoing off the wooden forefronts. The judge's expression hardened into a mask of legal coldness.
"You know the law will not recognize a marriage like yours, Thorne." Silas looked at Maylin. Then he looked back at the faces of the town. "The law may refuse to call her my wife," he said, "but the law does not decide who she is to me." He took a folded official document from his heavy coat. "This land is mine, and from this heartbeat forward, half of it belongs to her." The crowd went silent. A woman in a black bonnet stepped forward from the shadows. "Think of Sarah," she cried out. "How could you bring that woman into Sarah's home?" That was the blow that was meant to break him. Silas stood up in the wagon, tall and imposing. "My Sarah loved me," he shouted, "and she would hate to see me rot alone with nothing but ghosts for company." He reached for Maylin's hand and lifted it high. "This is Maylin. She is my family. She has a name, she has a place, and she has a share in this land."
He looked across the angry, confused crowd. "If anyone has a word against her, say it to my face right now." No one answered. Judge Miller took the document with a stiff, reluctant hand. "I can record the deed," he said, "but I cannot give you what the law refuses to grant." Silas nodded once. "I did not come here for your blessing. I came here so no man could ever say she had nowhere to belong." The judge signed the record in a flurry of ink. Silas turned to Maylin in front of everyone. "In my house, before God and before these mountains," he said, "you are my wife." Maylin's eyes filled with tears that did not fall. "And you are my husband," she whispered. As they walked back to the wagon, a sound broke the heavy silence. A stone flew through the air and hit the wooden seat with a sharp crack. Silas didn't stop. He didn't reach for his gun. He helped Maylin up and drove slowly out of town. He looked forward toward the safety of the mountains. When they reached the high pines, the tension finally snapped. Maylin started to cry. They were silent, heavy tears that soaked into her red silk. Silas pulled the horses to a stop. He gathered her into his large, protective arms. "I'm sorry they are like that," he whispered. "I am not crying for the stone," she said. "I am crying because of you. You stood beside me when everyone else wanted me to disappear." "I know the difference between fool's gold and the real thing," Silas said. Autumn bled into the hardest winter either of them had ever known. The snow piled up in drifts against the cabin walls. They were trapped inside for days at a time as the blizzards roared. The wind screamed like a wounded beast through the rafters. Every morning, Silas had to shovel a path to the barn just to feed the livestock. Inside, the heat of the stove was a constant, comforting presence. Maylin had turned the small space into a sanctuary. She hung dried herbs from the ceiling. She placed a colorful woven rug over the cold floorboards. She turned the house of mourning into a house of survival. By midwinter, the storm had cut the ranch off from the rest of the basin. The road to town vanished beneath the snow. Even the fence posts disappeared one by one beneath the drifts. One evening, Silas came in from the barn with ice in his beard. "The horses are eating more than I planned," he said. Maylin looked at the shelves. There were beans, a little flour, dried herbs, and not much else. She did not panic. She measured the food into small cloth bags. She marked each one with a charcoal line. "This is for this week," she said. "And this is for the week after." Silas watched her work. "You make it look easy." "No," Maylin said. "I make it look possible." Then a hard knock struck the door. Once, twice, 3 times. Silas reached for his rifle. "Who's there?" "Help! Please!" a voice groaned from the white dark. Silas forced the door open against the screaming wind. The cold rushed in, instantly freezing the air in the room.
A young man collapsed across the threshold. His clothes were stiff and crackling with ice. His skin was a terrifying shade of blue. It was young Miller, the judge's only son.
Mei Lin did not hesitate. She did not think about the stones or the Exclusion Act. She did not remember the hateful whispers in the town square. She moved with a calm, surgical precision. She removed his wet, freezing outer clothes. She wrapped him in thick, dry blankets. She kept him near the fire, but far enough to prevent the skin from burning. "Silas, warm water," she commanded, "and broth, slowly." They worked through the long, freezing night. The cold had taken a hard hold of him. Mei Lin kept him awake with quiet questions. She and Silas wrapped him in dry blankets and kept the warmth steady. They gave him broth one careful spoonful at a time. Through the long night, they refused to let him face the storm alone. She showed more mercy than the town had ever shown her. Her hands were steady, even as the storm threatened to tear the roof off. Silas watched her work, amazed by her quiet strength. She was a healer in a land that only knew how to wound.
By dawn, a faint, healthy pink returned to the young man's face. He opened his eyes and saw Mei Lin hovering over him. The yellow lamplight made her look like an angel in the gloom. "You're the woman," he whispered. "The one from the wagon." "I'm the woman who saved your life," she said. Her voice was firm, devoid of bitterness. "Your father's politics won't keep you warm in a storm. Only kindness can do that." The boy looked at his hands, wrapped in clean linen. He looked at the small, humble cabin that had given him life. 3 days later, the storm broke. The sky turned a brilliant, icy blue. Silas took the boy home on a horse-drawn sled. The snow was deep, but the horses were strong. Judge Miller was standing on his porch, looking haggard and broken. He had already given his son up for dead. When he saw the sled crest the hill, he nearly fell. He ran into the snow without his coat, sobbing. "He found me," the boy said, pointing at Silas.
"But Mei Lin, she's the one who saved me." The judge looked at Silas. The arrogance and the coldness had vanished from his eyes. He was no longer a representative of the law. He was just a father who had been given a miracle. "I don't know what to say, Thorn." "Say thank you," Silas said. His voice was hard as the winter ice. "And tell your neighbors something for me. Tell them dignity has no color." Silas turned the sled around and headed back to his ranch. Word spread through the Boise Basin like a slow thaw. The story of the rescue traveled from house to house. It reached the mining camps and the saloons. The hostility did not disappear overnight. Deep-rooted prejudice is a slow-growing weed. Some men still whispered in the shadows of the saloons. Some doors remained firmly closed. But the stones stopped flying. The air in town felt a little less heavy when they rode in. A few people began to nod at Silas and Mei Lin in town. It was a small change, but in the mountains, small changes mean everything. By spring, the snow began to recede from the valleys. The creeks roared with the sound of melting ice. One morning, Silas found something on the gatepost. 2 women had left small packets of seeds at the Thorns' gate. There was no note. There was no written apology, only the seeds of flowers and vegetables. It was a silent peace offering. It was not total forgiveness, but it was a start. Mei Lin kept her promise to the hills. "When the spring comes, I want to plant flowers there," she had told him. She pointed to the small, quiet hill where Sarah and the boy lay. "White lilies, for your first wife." She knelt in the damp dirt for hours. Her hands were stained with the dark, rich soil of Idaho. She spoke to Sarah in the quiet of the afternoon. She told her the house was warm and full of life again. She promised to care for the man they both loved. "A woman's sacrifice should never be forgotten," Mei Lin said. Silas watched her from the porch. He turned away so she would not see the tears in his eyes. For 3 years he had feared that loving again would be a betrayal. He thought happiness was a sin against the dead.
But Mei Lin had found a way to honor the woman he had lost. She didn't ask him to forget. She didn't ask him to remain lost in the past with her. She brought the past and the present together in the garden. A few days later, Silas found Mei Lin sitting alone beside the new lily bed. She was holding one of Sarah's old garden gloves. "I was afraid of this place at first," she said. Silas sat beside her. "Afraid of the hill? Afraid that I would always be a stranger standing outside someone else's memory." He took the glove gently from her hand. "You are not outside anything anymore, May." Mei Lin looked toward the cabin.
For the first time, she did not look like a traveler with a suitcase. She looked like a woman with roots. One afternoon, they were working together in the garden. The sun was warm and golden on their backs. The smell of wet earth and budding leaves filled the air. Mei Lin looked at the clothesline where her red dress snapped in the breeze. It was a bright splash of color against the blue sky. "I don't need to wear that anymore to prove a point," she said. "I'm not hiding because I'm finally home." Silas walked over and kissed her forehead. His skin was rough, but his touch was tender. "You were home the moment you arrived at the gate, May." She leaned her head against his chest, listening to his heart. It was a steady, rhythmic beat, full of new strength. "I have something to tell you, Silas. The house, it's going to need a third person very soon." Silas felt the world stand still. The wind seemed to stop in the trees. "Is it another heart?" Silas asked. His voice was trembling with a new kind of joy. "A small one," she smiled. "A child of these mountains." Silas held her then, tighter than he ever had before. He looked out over the land that was now half hers. He looked at the fence he had mended, now standing straight and true. That evening, Silas sat on the porch beside his wife. The shadows grew long across the basin. The fence post he had been mending on the day she arrived stood strong. It was a symbol of a life rebuilt from the ruins. Above the hill, the white lilies moved softly beneath the larch tree. They were ghosts of beauty in the fading light. Inside the cabin, the fire burned bright and steady. The mountains were still hard. The frontier was still a place of danger and struggle. The world beyond the ranch was still imperfect. The laws were still cold, and the people were still flawed. But the house was warm. The lilies were blooming. And neither of them was alone anymore.